In this video, we're going to learn how to create a pause menu in Unity. In another video, we talked about how to create a start menu, and this one we're going to do a pause menu, which is going to be very similar, but have some new things like stopping everything in the game. So right now we have this very basic movement in the game. This is from the ground check video or the boxcast video, whatever you think about it as. And the first thing that we need to do is create a menu for our game, a pause menu. So what we're going to do is click the plus button here and go to UI, Canvas. Because the canvas is the parent of all UI elements. In Unity, the canvas is used as a relative space for you to put UI things. What that means is the canvas has a top left, a top right, a bottom left, and a bottom right because it's a big box. This big box represents our screen. So things that I put in relevance to the corners or the middle or whatever here, that's what's going to appear in my screen. If I right click the canvas and click UI, and we do, where is it? Text Mesh Pro, and I import TMP Essentials, which will take a minute. What's that? Or maybe it won't take a minute. That was really quick. If I move this text relative to the top right of this big box, then it's going to be relative to the top right of my screen. And so on and so forth to the other sets. I'm not going to demonstrate every single one. Anyways, what I want to do is create a pause menu here. So I'm going to create a text here, and I'm kind of eyeballing it toward the middle, but I'm going to change my position X value to 0 so I know it's in the middle. And then go down to the new text value here and change it to say pause. This is still not centered because even though the box is centered, the text within the box isn't. So I need to scroll down and change my alignment to be, I'll do centered vertically and horizontally. And now we'll see that it's centered. I'll also bold the text, make it look nice. I also like to use auto size 99% of the time, and it's choose some values like 15 for a minimum size, and we'll say 30 for a max. I think that looks pretty good. Most people tend to overestimate how big they should make their UIs or their cameras. Typically, it's not as big as you think it would be, especially because most players will be sitting close to the monitor or using a TV. Next thing we're going to do is I'm going to right click canvas again and click UI and then make a button. This button, I'm gonna change the name and call it resume. I'll make one more and call it quit. We'll kind of quick through this because I'm using keyboard shortcuts. I just hit Control C, Control V to copy the existing button and make a new one. Under the resume button, I'm going to change the text to say resume. Under the quit button, I'm going to change the text to say quit. Notice that the way this works is it has an object with an image component and a button component, and it has a child with a text component, which means that whatever text settings you're used to modifying on a text object will also work for buttons. The quit button, I'm going to move it a little far down here so that we can see both the resume and the quit. Go back to my game view, it looks like this now. This is good, but we want a few things. One, we want a backdrop because like it should be dark or whatever. And then we want the way that resume and quit work right now is we want to create some sort of layout that'll automatically align them because it's really easy to accidentally like misalign these things and mess up your game. And we don't want that. First thing we're going to do is select all three of our UI elements here and right click and then click create empty parent, which will make a new object to parent them to. I'm going to call this pause menu. And then this pause menu object, we want to basically have it fill up the full screen. To do that, we're going to open up our anchors here. And our anchors are currently set to 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. What that means is that this object is relative to the middle of the screen. 0.5 on both x's means it's relative to the middle on the x-axis, and 0.5 on both y's means it's relative to the middle of the y-axis. If I change both y's to 1, it'd be relative to the top of the screen. If I change both x's to 0, it'd be relative to the left of the screen. So now it's to the top left. You can see these little arrows move around as we make changes here. You can also drag the arrows too if it makes more sense to you. If we set both these numbers to be different, it'll stretch between those values. So I did 0.25 on the x and 0.75 on the y. It would stretch between the values of 0.25 and 0.75, so like that middle part of the screen. Or if I just change my x to 0 on the min and the max to 1, it would stretch between the left and the right side of the screen, which is what we want. We're going to do the same thing for the y here. We're going to set the y min to 0 and the y max to 1. This is now relative to the entire screen because it's stretching between the very left and the very right, the very bottom, and the very top. Now we have a left, top, right, bottom value here. These are like the gutters or the margins, the padding or whatever of this. This is basically how far from the edges do we want it to be. We don't want it to be far at all. We want it to be flush with the edges. So we're going to set it to 0 on all of these values here. Now you'll see that this whole thing is filled up. Previously there were these like dotted lines that marked where the menu was, but now it's filled up the whole screen. Not much has changed in here. A few things did move around, but that's fine. We can move them back. What we're going to do is I'm going to right click the pause menu and click create empty, which is going to create another new object, and I'm going to call this background. And then we're going to give this an image component because the background has some sort of image. And we notice the anchor is here. This is childed to the pause menu. We still want to take up the whole background. So we'll do 0 on the X, and then 1, and then 0, and then 1 on the Y, and then set all these to 0 so it takes up the full screen. Now, what we want is to create some sort of dark image or dark color. It's also semi-transparent. So in our image component here, under color, we're going to click on the color, we're going to switch it to black, and then we're going to adjust the alpha here. So it's something we want. I think, what's this, going to be 0 and 255. I'm going to switch it to the HSV mode, which is hue, saturation, value, because the numbers make a little more sense. It goes between 0 and 100 and not 0 and 255. I'm going to say that I think 50 probably works because I like the number 50. Notice this is also making everything else dark. That's because right now our background is in front of our other UI elements. To fix this, drag it to the top of this list here. The way the Unity UI works is it draws elements top to bottom. So it's going to draw the background, then it's going to draw the text, then draw the resume button, then draw the quit button. And since it's drawing in this order, that means things later on, like the quit button, will draw after the resume button. Or previously, it was drawing the background after the quit, which meant that it was drawing on top of it. So you want things that go on top to be on the bottom of your UI, which sounds unintuitive, but it makes sense if you understand why it does that. Again, it's just the order that it draws things in. I'm going to rename the text TMP here to call it label, just so it's more obvious what this is for, and then move it back toward the top a little bit. Now, this isn't necessary, but I'm going to make it take up the entire width of the screen, which you're not going to notice any difference because the text is not going to stretch. It's just going to make it so it can stretch if I need to. Like if I made the pause label really long, then it would not break it. Depending on what your game does, maybe that's necessary, I don't know. And then I like where it is height-wise. I'm just going to make it a little more nice. Notice that the Y is relative to the middle of the screen. We don't want that. We want it to be relative to the top of the screen. So we'll do 1 for both of these. And then my position Y here, I'll change it to a nice value like -50. Now if we play our game and we change our UI, we'll see that it's always relative to the top of the screen. It's hard to tell with these ratios here, but you can see like this one, it's still at the top. It's a little small, but we'll fix that later. Couple more things. Resume and quit. See the relative middle screen? That's fine, but we want them to be like a pair. So we're gonna select them and then right click, create empty parent, call this buttons. This is just good as far as organization goes. Both of our buttons are childed to this buttons empty, and all of our elements are childed to this pause menu empty. It's nice to have good organization like this because if I wanted to move the entire pause menu, I could, or disable the entire pause menu, I could, or move just the buttons I could, or disable just the buttons I could. One thing I do want to do actually is this buttons object here, this empty, I want to give it a vertical layout group component. The vertical layout group component will take all children and will make it so they have to follow a certain pattern. Notice that with these ones selected, the position X and position Y are actually grayed out. I can't change them anymore. If I tried to move them, I couldn't. That's because the vertical layout group is saying all the children of this element need to be aligned vertically, which is really nice because we don't have to worry about what if they got misaligned anymore. You can also set things like use the child's height and control its height if you want to take up the full size of the box here. If I undo like this real quick and I stretch out the vertical layout group, I might want to make more space for buttons later. but now there's a bunch of empty space right now. If I control the child size, it'll make each child bigger to fill up the space. I might say that I want to do something like that, then take my spacing value here and set it to be some sort of high number like 25. Let's make the whole buttons layout thing smaller in general. We'll say a height of 125 makes sense to me, and a position of -50. And then we'll say a spacing of 25 makes sense to me. Go back to the game view here. Let's do a position of -25. That's better. 37.5. Anyways, I feel like that's pretty good now. It's still, I feel like I want to make the background just a little darker. I feel like I can see things a little too well in the game. It's not, with the white, it wouldn't be an issue in a normal game, but with the white objects in the background, I don't think it was providing enough contrast. Anyways, there's more settings to the vertical layout group here. We're going to ignore those. We also might want to check both of these on the width. If something is vertically aligned, I always check everything on the width. If it's horizontally aligned, I always check everything on the height, just because it's a little more friendly. There's less values I have to worry about in here now. Like, see, everything here is grayed out now, which is perfect. Add more buttons, they'll kind of go nicely. I might want to like extend the whole size of the layout, but that's a lot easier than the alternative. It's looking good now. I'm going to add a drop down to these buttons, or sorry, a drop shadow to these buttons to add more contrast. So with resume selected, I'm going to, actually, if I control select both of them, I can do it just at once. Add component, type in shadow. Very subtly just added a drop shadow. But let's set the effect distance on the x-axis to 0 and the y-axis to -5 to make it less subtle. Now you can really see the shadow there. This is good so far. One more thing before we start writing code that I want to do is make the canvas scale with our screen size better. Because what you might have noticed earlier when we were playing around with different aspects is that by changing it to an actual ratio with numbers, it just completely, like everything is tiny now. The reason is because by default, for some reason, the canvas scaler is set to constant pixel size, which means that no matter how big your screen is, the elements will be the same size. It's almost like this element is 2 inches wide and then no matter what screen that is, 2 inches is 2 inches. But we don't want that because if I'm playing on a big screen, we want everything to scale with the screen size. Otherwise, the UI just looks really weird and spaced out like this. If I did click the dot 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 here and go into maximize mode, you can see a little better what that would look like, and you can still tell that everything's way too small. The canvas scaler here has a setting called UI scale mode that we can use to fix that. We're going to change it from constant pixel size to scale with screen size. Hello? Scale with screen size. Reference resolution, I normally set to 1920 by 1080, but then I'd have to resize everything, and I don't feel like doing that, so let's keep it at 800 by 600 for now. And you'll notice now that as long as I'm using the 16 by 9 aspect ratio, it looks the exact same, which is great. The game will look something like this if we play it, which is exactly what we want. It's very polished with these shadows and the colors too, by the way. This is good. We have all this set up now. Now we just want to trigger the pause menu when we press a button, and then make it so clicking resume or pressing the button again will untrigger the pause menu. And we want to make the quit button take us back to another scene, and then make the game pause when the game is paused. So to do that, we're going to write some scripts. I'm going to click the check mark by the pause menu here to disable the pause menu, and we're going to create our first script. Down in my scripts folder, I'm going to right click, create mono behavior script, and call this pause menu. Note that pause menu is all one word with a capital P and a capital M. Do not put spaces in your script names. In general, Windows File Explorer doesn't always like spaces in names. GitHub doesn't always like spaces in names. Unity doesn't always like spaces in names. Just make it all one word. But since you're making it one word, capitalize the first letter of each one so that you can tell where one word stops and where word ends. This is a pause menu. It's not a pausum menu. Just make sure you capitalize the right letters. Now, Visual Studio might take a second to load in correctly, but we're going to handle all of our pause menu logic in here. We have a void start and a void update. Void start runs code immediately. Void update runs code every frame, but we don't need either of these, so we're going to get rid of both. Our pause menu script here is basically only going to control the buttons and checking for a button press. So here, we're going to make a public void called pause. We're going to make a public void called resume. We're going to make a public void called quit. And then I think that's all we need. We might add more later, I'm not sure. Whenever we add voids, we're adding actions or like functions to our script. These are things our script can do. Our pause menu should be able to pause, resume, and quit. So that's why we're adding those 3 functions right now. As far as trying to gain the skills to create scripts from scratch goes, one of the first things you want to figure out is what are the requirements for my script? What should it be able to do? Being able to list out your requirements before you start the script makes it so you know the direction you need to go in before you start blocking it. We also need a piece of information in this script. We need a private bool for whether or not we're currently paused, because we need this to control the toggle. So if you pause, it unpauses, and vice versa. So we're actually going to add one more here. I'm not sure if we need it, but we'll add it anyways. We'll make a public void called toggle. In our pause function here, the first thing we're going to do is say is paused equals true, and then in resume we'll do the same thing. We'll say is paused equals false, and in toggle we'll say is paused equals exclamation mark is paused. What this means is that it'll get the current value, which is paused, and then exclamation mark means flip it. So if paused is true, then not is paused is false. If is paused is false, then not is paused is true, which means that basically we're just flipping the value of is paused here. In our quit function, we don't need anything to do with pausing, obviously, but when we pause the game, we want to say is paused to true, and then we want the pause menu to become visible. So under our private void is paused here, we're going to make a serialized field private game object called underscore pause menu. I'm ignoring Copilot, it's being stupid right now. In another video I talked about this. A serialized field private is kind of the same thing as writing public. Because what I mentioned before is that if you want a setting in your script or something that you can change in the inspector, you need to make it public. Technically, the difference between private and public is that a private value or function or variable or whatever is accessible from other scripts. For example, if I had an inventory script, I would not want the items to be private because I might need to access them from like a shop script or a player stats script or something like that. But if they were private, they'd only be accessible in the inventory script. My is paused bool is private because I want it to be localized to this script. I don't want other scripts to be able to access if the game is paused or not. Although as I'm mentioning this, maybe that is something you might want. The way we write this, we're not going to need that functionality, but there's like a 10% chance you would need it in your game. I wouldn't assume that you do, but if you're thinking to yourself, oh man, this thing really needs to know if the game is paused or not, then sure. We're going to add code that freezes everything in the game when it's paused in this script. So you probably, again, don't need to make this public. We also have the pause menu here. So back to what I was talking about. If it's public, you can access it in the inspector. But you can also access it from other scripts, which we don't want. We want to be able to access it from the inspector, but not other scripts. So to do that, we have the serialized field tag here. This says that pause menu cannot be accessed from other scripts, but it can still be accessed in the inspector because it's going to serialize it, which means it's going to save it to a file, more specifically your scene file. Now we haven't put this pause menu script in anything yet, and intuition might be telling you to put it on the pause menu object, which would normally be a really great idea. Like you're going to put a player script on a player object. Like that makes sense. We can't put the pause menu script on the pause menu object because this object is constantly getting disabled when we stop the pause menu, which means that the script won't run. Like, it even starts out disabled, which means that this script is basically not going to do anything while this object is disabled. We don't want that. We're going to put it on our canvas instead, which means the canvas is going to get bloated with a ton of components, but whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm going to just like drop down these ones, so because we're not going to use them at all. Pause menu here, we need to plug in our pause menu game object, so we're going to do that. All good there. Now, in here, in our pause function, what we want to add is when is paused is true, we're going to take pause menu dot set active true. I don't know why Copilot's being really bad lately. In the resume function, we're going to do the opposite. Pause menu set active false. In the toggle here, we're going to say pause menu dot set active is paused. Now I want you to notice this for a second. Previously, when isPause was true, then pause menu set active was true. When isPause was false, then pause menu set active was false. So it's fair to say that whatever isPause is, pause menu set active should be the same thing. So we can just plug the variable in there. Next thing in our pause function that we want to do is we're going to say time.timescale equals, it really doesn't know what pause means. It keeps giving me recommendations for when you'd be unpausing. Time.timescale equals 0. This means that the game's speed is going to be 0. If I set to 2, it'd be running twice as fast. 0.5 would be half as fast. 0 means the game is just stopped completely. The resume function, I'm going to undo it. I'm going to say timescale equals 1. And my toggle function, I'm going to create something called ternary. I'm going to say that timescale is equal to isPaused question mark 0 colon 1. This is kind of confusing to read. What this means is that if isPaused is true, then timescale will be equal to 0. And if it's not true, then it'll be equal to 1. A ternary basically lets you do an if-else statement when you're assigning values to things. So now this script is not the best script in the world because we have pause and resume. This is totally fine. The toggle function I'm not completely happy with because this script would, if we ever made changes to what happens when we pause or resume the game, we'd also need to make changes to our toggle, which isn't really a good idea. But this is fine how it is right now. Let's test this out, and if it works, we'll do the quit function too. Let's, oh yeah, the last thing we need to do is actually make it so these buttons respond to a button press on the keyboard, which means that, like with the player script, we need to add an input action.callback context CTX to these. Resume won't be happening on a keyboard press. We're just pretend that it might be able to in the future. This will not make it incompatible with other things. It just means that we can apply it to a button press if we want to. Okay, so now this is kind of a weird thing we're going to do. On our player object, we're going to go down to the UI events, and we're going to look for if there's anything pause related, which there isn't. So we're just going to go into our player input actions actually, edit project settings, and then input system package. And I'm going to move this tab over here. And we're going to see if there's anything that might be kind of pause related. Navigate happens when we click gamepad, D-pad. This makes sense. Submit, cancel. We're going to add a new action here. If I double click the project settings window, it'll full screen it. What we're going to do is click the plus button here and add a binding. Oh wait, nope, that's not it. Nothing selected. Pause menu up here and type in pause. Toggle. And then what we want to do is say how we can do a pause toggle. The way that the input system works is you define action maps, which are things you can control, and then actions, which are things that that thing can do. For example, you can control a player, and a player can move, look, attack, interact, crouch, jump, previous, next, sprint. I don't know if it needs that ones really. And then after you define what they can do, you define how it does that. So how does a player move? The left stick, WASD, primary 2D axis, or a stick. How do they attack? They use the button west or the left mouse button or a primary tap, something like that. So in a UI here, with our pause toggle here, our first binding, we're going to click the path button and the listen button and hit the escape key on our keyboard, which is kind of ironic because it actually just escapes out of that menu. So we have to actually just find it manually. Let's go to path, keyboard, by character map to key, and look for escape. Nope. Let's do by by location key. Here it is, escape. And then using control scheme, let's select keyboard and mouse. Let's add gamepad support to our game too. Let's hit the plus button and add a second binding, which means that we can either hit the escape key or whatever thing we set up now to pause the game. We're going to set the control scheme here to gamepad and then go to path, gamepad, and look for some generic pause button, which will probably be the start button here. This is now saying that we can do the pause toggle event by either hitting escape on the keyboard or start on the gamepad. This sounds good to me. Let's double click the window to unfull screen it and go back to our scene view. In our player input component, under events, under UI, let's look for the pause toggle that we just added, and then let's hit plus. Let's drag in our canvas, and then go from no function to pause menu and do toggle. And now for the moment of truth. If the escape button will actually toggle it or not. It theoretically should, but sometimes pause menu works weirdly with player stuff. Hit escape, you'll notice that it shows the pause menu. Escape again, it stops showing the pause menu. If I click on our canvas here and go into debug mode, we can see this private is pause variable here we talked about earlier. When I hit escape, it becomes true. When I hit escape again, it becomes false. This is exactly what we want. And then again, back to our code, you'll notice that here it's saying to flip the value, set it active based on the value, and set the time scale based on that. Let's check the time scale. We always want to test things when you make them. Never assume that it'll work. So let's move around. While we're in the air, we'll pause the game. See, everything froze. Hit again, and everything's totally fine. So the pause menu seems to work great. We didn't make resume or quit do anything yet, so let's do that right now. For resume, we're going to go down. We'll see this on click event here. Let's hit the plus button, and then drag in our canvas. Pause menu. Oh, I was wrong. Giving it the callback context does make it not appear in this list. So let's take away the callback context from this one and this one. Okay. After that reloads, we should be able to plug the function in. So we're going to do the resume button on here. And then for quit, we're going to plug in the quit function. Notice that we use toggle when we press the button. The quit is the quit button, and the resume is the resume button. We never did use pause, but we could in the future. You want to always just kind of future-proof your code. Even if you can't think of a use for something right now, maybe in the future you will. Let's test the resume button, see if it works. Looks like it works perfectly fine. And then quit doesn't do anything. Let's do that real quick. Now, there's two things quit button could do. One, it could just application.quit, which would just close the game. Or it could take you back to the title screen. If you just want to close the game, do this line of code right here. I'll actually write a little comment. I'll say, if you want it to close the game, and then here, and I'll say, if you want it to take you, oh my gosh, take you to the title screen. And then I'll write the code here. Now, I'm just being weird with the comments here. Like, this is more for you than it is for the code. I'll just comment this one out because we're not going to use it. But I'm going to show you how you would go back to the title screen here. You would say scene manager, which is part of the scene management namespace. So make sure you hit enter. It's going to add this line of code here for you. Dot load scene, parentheses, quotation marks, the name of the scene you want to load. In this case, I don't have any actual title screen or anything in my game, but if I did, I'd probably call it title. Remember, this has to match the name of the scene exactly. By default, your Unity scene is called sample scene, which has no spaces and has capital S for both the words. So you'd have to type in the word. If you want to take the sample scene, you'd have to take the sample scene, spelled and capitalized, and not spaced, like that. Unity and coding in general is very finicky about how you spell things. This scene doesn't exist, so it's not going to work, so I'm not even going to bother showing. But it would work if you did have this scene, and the scene would have to be in your project's scene list. Anyways, that's basically it for the video. That's how you add a pause menu. Freezes the game. You can either hit the keyboard button to unpause and pause, obviously, or you hit the resume button when you have the game paused, and the quit button theoretically takes you back to the title screen. Again, you never really want to say something works in theory. But I'm not going to add a title screen for this video because it's not really necessary. If it doesn't work for you, just come find me and I'll help you figure it out. But that's it. Thanks for watching.